Hi guys, let's discuss Boots versus Zayas today. This fight's coming up tomorrow from Brooklyn, New York. This is the WBA and WBO light middleweight championship of the world. And the first thing that jumps off the page to me in this fight is that it's a really big jump up in class for Xander Zayas. And I think the obvious response to that, and the response from, I'm sure, Zayas himself and from the people that are backing him is, well, Boots is overrated. And I think, unfortunately for Xander Zayas, that's what he has to bank on in this fight, that there really is some kind of truth to the notion that Boots is, a protected fighter, or that that Boots himself maybe has never fought somebody quite on the level of Zayas, because Zayas has very fast hands. He does have a very authentic mix of speed and power, right? That got him signed to Top Rank when he was 16, that made him this sort of prodigy. He had that profile because of his mix of speed and power that's still there. He's only 23 now, Xander Zayas. He obviously still has that mix of speed and power. But banking that it's enough to break through Boots Ennis is a very bold proposition. Boots Ennis is an undisputed level fighter. We know that. Boots Ennis has been an undisputed champion. And, to a certain extent, he does seem, I understand how people see him as being a protected fighter, but you always have to sort of go heads and tails with that, right? I mean, Boots doesn't really have a contract like Terrence Crawford did with Top Rank that sort of would stop him from facing kind of whoever. But yeah, admittedly, Boots Ennis doesn't necessarily take the biggest fights. People have noticed, and you can of course accuse Boots Ennis of being a protected fighter and have that argument hold some water. It is boxing after all, but at the end of the day, you always have to balance, right? Is he a protected fighter, or is he just blowing through everybody, right? Is his resume sort of lacking in big names? Because how could anybody fight Boots Ennis and, grow their career from there? And that's the question that Xander Zayas is asking here. Can you fight Boots Ennis and keep yourself on any kind of upward trajectory? Not even necessarily, disturbingly for Xander Zayas, that I think he's even on an upward trajectory. I don't necessarily think that Xander Zayas is on an upward trajectory. He only won by split decision in his last fight, which, it is a, unification title defense. So it being at a high level, sure, but the competition nowhere near the kind of fighter he's going to be facing here in Boots Ennis. Zayas is the kind of fighter who I think is very used to, if he's not the A-side marketing-wise, which he always has been in his career actually up to this point, but if he's not the A-side marketing-wise, then he's definitely the A-side in terms of skill. I actually think that Boots Ennis is one of the best fighters in the world at compensating for not having a speed advantage, which is just very quickly probably the biggest and most important advantage Zayas has in this fight. And the reason that I think anybody would pick him is because he does have a decent speed advantage over Boots Ennis. He has a decent speed advantage over a lot of fighters, but Boots' speed, in the same way that we think of speed like Floyd Mayweather or even Terrence Crawford, but a lot of different fighters, that kind of Sugar Ray Leonard speed, we think Muhammad Ali, that kind of speed fighter. That's not really what Boots Ennis is. Boots Ennis is a lot closer to Bernard Hopkins in terms of the actual hand speed itself isn't what's magical or what makes it look fast. Bernard Hopkins looks fast, but his hand speed wasn't actually that crazy. Same thing with Boots Ennis. It's really about the timing, right? And this is a weird take, this is a weird call, but he kind of reminds me of Lionel Messi. I've been watching the World Cup a lot recently, and he reminds me of Messi because if you watch a lot of Messi's best goals, right? And I'm not saying that, Boots Ennis is like the Messi of boxing. That's stupid. He's not as good of a boxer as Messi is a soccer player, just really. But he does the little things right at exactly the right time, right? Messi dribbles, his dribble sequences that, it looks like him weaving through a whole team, and, it looks so incredible, and it is an incredible athletic feat, him getting through, a whole other team trying to defend him. Messi does it with these sequential yet extremely simple, individual dribble movements done in sequence, right? Where every single thing that he's doing is actually very simple, but he's just putting them together in sequence and doing them all with perfect timing. And he's just able to take the entire opposite team's defense apart, multiple people. I'm telling you, Boots Ennis is the kind of fighter who would be able to fight multiple people if you put there in the ring with him. He has that kind of mastery of sequence and mastery of timing that makes him kind of impossible to deal with as an offensive threat and as an offensive weapon in the same exact way as you see Messi in soccer, right? That's what I'm saying with that point. I'm not saying that Boots Ennis is as good of a boxer as Messi is a soccer player. What I'm saying is Boots' game is predicated on his perfect timing and his perfect sequential timing, right? In a way that makes him inherently a great combination puncher, inherently a very gifted counter puncher, and inherently a very gifted defensive fighter. And it's a very commonly made point about Boots Ennis by people that actually know boxing, that Boots Ennis is one of the best fighters in the world at doing simple, little, even inch-sized shifts, either in footwork or in body movement or in his guard, to compensate defensively. He really is a textbook defensive master. He's not the typical, move back and disengage like Shakur Stevenson. He's not moving all around the ring like Sugar Ray or Muhammad Ali. He'll move just a couple inches over and reset the exchange. And maybe not, he might not even move enough to necessarily make the punch angles of the exchanges really all that different. He's just moving to put himself where he wants to be and making sure that the fight is somewhere other than where his opponent wants it to be. And that's why, in my opinion, Boots is pretty much an impossible task for Xander Zayas, because Boots just doesn't let you dictate. I'm sure that Xander Zayas thinks that because he has better speed than Boots, that he's going to surprise people, that he's going to be able to stand right in front of Boots and trade with him for 12 rounds. I'm sure that Xander Zayas thinks that. The reality is much different. We've seen it time and time again in Boots Ennis' fight. Boots makes sure that he's the one who lands the biggest shot of the fight. Maybe not even the biggest shot of the round. He's good at landing the biggest shot of the round. He's good at stealing grounds on judges' scorecards, to be sure. That's a big part of Boots' style. But he also makes sure that he lands the biggest shot of the whole fight and the shot that changes the fight. That's what Boots is always looking for. And it's not like my analysis of Shaky Foster versus Raymond Ford. And I thought that Raymond Ford might do something similar to what I think Zayas is going to do in this fight, where I predicted that Raymond Ford would basically use up his gas tank early, not only his gas tank, but also his, show his offensive hand to Shaky Foster early, and that would ultimately be a mistake that Raymond Ford would be susceptible to. I think that's definitely going to be a problem for Xander Zayas in this fight. I think there's two strategies that Xander Zayas could employ in this fight, and the more exciting one that definitely benefits Boots more, unfortunately, is the one that I think is more likely that he's going to go for, that he believes in his power, that he believes in his speed, and that he believes that actually, like he said in the lead up to this fight, and like many people that have fought Boots and underestimated Boots in the past have said, that Boots is quote-unquote there to be hit. Now, I've already explained in this video why Boots isn't actually there to be hit. He's an expert at making himself look like he's there to be hit when, dude, he's not actually there to be hit. He's going to hit you. He's not going to be the one getting hit. You're going to be the one getting hit, not him. He's not there to be hit. But it's understandable that Zayas probably thinks, with his speed and his power as a 23-year-old unified world champion, that he can just stand in front of Boots and knock right through his guard. And admittedly, if I was a 23-year-old unified world champion who signed with Top Rank when I was 16 years old, I would probably think the same thing about myself. So I don't really blame Xander Zayas if he comes in here and tries to throw hands with Boots Ennis and gets knocked out inside the first 6 rounds. That honestly really would not surprise me, even though Xander Zayas is a gifted fighter and a unified world champion. He's also a gifted fighter and a unified world champion whose in-ring form has been, going downhill, and now he takes this massive leap in competition. It's not that hard to see why I might pick Boots in this fight in that way, by a knockout. But I think that the better strategy, and the way that Zayas can avoid that fate, is by having a more measured and tactful approach, because Boots Ennis is a calculated finisher, right? He's an information downloader, just like Terrence Crawford is. He said that he takes inspiration from Terrence Crawford, and now Terrence Crawford sits there and just, he lets the first 4 or 5 rounds of the fight go by in their natural flow and lets the opponent kind of approach the fight the way they want to approach it, with the notion that he has 12 rounds to do his work. That's something that Boots Ennis is eminently aware of. And Xander Zayas prides him on being an old school fighter, so I would expect him to have a similar 12-round mentality. But I think that, the nature of the moment has the potential to get to Zayas here. This is a really big fight for Xander Zayas' career, and not only that, it's sort of occupying, a very empty space on the boxing calendar here after we've gotten a lot of the big fights earlier in this month. We've got some, sort of mid kind of warm-up fights coming up this summer, and the probably bigger fights are going to happen later this year. This is kind of a decently sized fight here in the middle of the year, and a really big stage here for Xander Zayas, especially compared to his other previous stages that he's been on. So if he actually approaches this fight with tact, I'll be very, very impressed. And he'll sort of prove, I think, ultimately the reason why you really signed somebody like this at 16 years old. Why this guy is 23 and already a unified world champion, having honestly, respectfully, not fought anybody anywhere near that level, to be honest. Well, here it is right now. Here's Boots Ennis, most certainly in any era, at least a unified, or especially, really, honestly, to be real, he's an undisputed level fighter, because the people who are doubting him are probably going to see in this fight what happens when you try to over-aggress against a guy like Boots Ennis, when you try to take the fight to somebody like Boots Ennis. I think if you want my honest opinion, I think it's going to be one really big body shot, probably at some point in the middle of the fight, where Zayas is going to look confident. There might even be moments where it looks like he's going to break through. But Boots is going to see it at some point. At some point early, he's going to see it, and at some point in the middle rounds, he's going to act on it. And hopefully that big shot to the ribs, that big shot to the kidney or to the liver doesn't just leave Zayas doubled over on the canvas and, end the fight. But there's going to be some shot to the body, I think, in this fight that changes it, that sort of takes the steam away from Zayas. And I think it's another reason why it would really behove Zayas to be a lot more calculated and honestly tactful and more boring, because the truth is, just like Terrence Crawford, Boots Ennis will let a fight be boring if you let him. He doesn't care. He knows he has 12 rounds to work. Zayas knows he has 12 rounds to work. This could end up being like a lot of unification fights throughout the history of boxing, where because you have two more intelligent operators, you don't see a super action-packed fight early. And if you're rooting for Zayas, you should honestly hope for that, because I think that Zayas' ego is going to fool him a little bit here into thinking that he can swarm Boots Ennis, or that he can, that like he said, Boots Ennis is there to be hit, because I really don't think that's the reality. Additionally, Boots Ennis is one of the best fighters in the world at, making little compensations for shots, leaning into shots and making sure that shots don't quite land on the temple, don't quite land on the solar plexus, right? Just making sure that he doesn't take those big, impactful shots. And I think that he's also very, very good at, if that's a skill that Zayas also has, he's good at just fooling people. He's good at getting you to walk into traps. I know that Boots Ennis is a way, way, way better trap setter than Xander Zayas, and that's something that I'm going to be looking for here. I expect that Boots Ennis, like I said, is going to land the biggest shot in this fight. So the ultimate thing I'm going to pick, because I know that this is a Boots Ennis fight, he's fighting Xander Zayas, who's a unified champion. I'll definitely pick unanimous decision for Boots Ennis in this fight, but my sort of secondary pick, my sort of hot take, would be a mid-round KO, even a mid-round body shot KO, although I'm not necessarily aware of how tough to the body Xander Zayas is. He looks like a pretty fit guy, so he might be hard to knock out with a body shot, but that doesn't mean that he can't be hurt with a body shot. I think also that Boots is going to have, in addition to having a tactical advantage and a timing advantage, and such a crucial timing advantage that I think it negates any of the other advantages that Zayas could have. He's also, I think, despite both men being listed at 5'9", going to be the larger fighter in the ring and appear as the larger fighter. And I just think that, again, over time, Zayas has to be really, really careful over the course of this fight with how he uses his energy and how he expends his energy, because it is, to a certain extent, going to be a little bit like a boxing video game, this fight, like Undisputed for Xander Zayas. If that stamina bar gets too low, he's going to be in much more significant risk of taking serious damage. He can't let himself, end up in a position where Ennis has more energy than him. He can't, allow himself to get caught like that. I think fighters in early rounds, it's just classic. It's like so many championship fights even that we've seen in the past, like so many fights in boxing or MMA, anything, where somebody expends their energy early on thinking that they're going to get the knockout, thinking that they're going to get the finish, thinking that they're going to, how much could you swing the scorecards? Think about boxing scoring. It's a 10-9 scoring system. How much are you really going to do on the scorecards out there in round 1, in round 2, and round 3? Throwing hands wildly and trying to knock the guy out. There's almost no extent to which Zayas could look good. Zayas could be going on Boots like George Foreman on Joe Frazier. He could knock him down 7 times in the first 3 rounds, and I would still be sitting here like, I think Boots could probably still win this fight in round 10 or 11. Like, genuinely, seriously. I think it would just, it's a fool's mission for Zayas to come in there and try to get Boots out of there. early or to be overly aggressive early. Mainly because we don't score fights like that in boxing. How much damage are you really going to do? You're going to knock them down 4 times in one round? So yeah, that's my prediction for Boots versus Zayas. Let me know what you guys think about this fight. I'm going to be back hopefully with a prediction for the Zuffa boxing card, or thoughts about the Zuffa boxing card. At least I'll make a review video of Zuffa boxing like I usually do. I didn't have a video about UFC White House because, to be honest, I just didn't really feel inspired to make one. I felt like there plenty of people made their opinion clear on those fights. My basic short opinion is, I called that Gaethje was going to be able to, potentially outlast Topuria, and that's basically what happened. I thought that fight should have been stopped after the 3rd round. Of course, I thought it was incredibly goofy that they just kicked both doctors out. Both doctors said, Topuria can't go anymore, stop this fight right now. And they just kicked both doctors out of the ring and let round 4 start. And Joe Rogan was talking like they were ready to start round 5 too, which was crazy. But then, thankfully, Topuria quit on the stool because that was enough. That fight should have been stopped after round 3. And it was a brutal fight. It was a back and forth fight. It was honestly one of the better UFC title fights maybe in history. I'll be interested to see where that fight ends up. But again, it's Ilia Topuria versus Justin Gaethje. It's hardly surprising that I'm saying that about that fight. It's an inherently great matchup. And Pereira versus Gane I thought was very funny. I thought that Pereira, to be honest, he added the weight the wrong way. He added the weight that you'd want to add the weight, right? He added the weight at the dinner table, not in the gym. And when you're fighting Cyril Gane, that's not going to work. Cyril Gane isn't even just a natural heavyweight. He's like a freak for a heavyweight. He would be, he'd be fighting at super heavyweight in amateur Olympic boxing. He's a huge dude. And Alex Pereira is a light heavyweight, cruiserweight sized guy who can go up to heavyweight. But when I picture Alex Pereira going up to heavyweight, I picture bigger, more muscles. And that's not what we got in this fight. So understandably, he did kind of just get crushed by Gane. And I think that if Pereira wants to make it as a heavyweight, which I don't really know why he would have to do that. He's made plenty of money. I don't really know what the point would be other than to win the UFC heavyweight title. I don't really think that he has that many aspirations as a heavyweight, but if he does have aspirations that he really wants to win that heavyweight title, he's going to need to get in the gym and have a different approach to his just physical strength and conditioning next time if he wants to win. That's really my thoughts on those two UFC White House fights. I thought Liam Paro did a great job against Lewis Crocker. A lot of volume from Paro. I actually scored the fight even, but the truth is I think I scored round 1 wrong. I scored round 1 for Crocker. Crocker looked aggressive in round 1. There were a lot of parts of this fight where Crocker was able to aggress and was able to move forward, and the truth is Crocker definitely looked like the more powerful fighter. And given that this was a championship fight, he also looked a little bit more like the kind of fighter you would think of as a champion, right? Paro, he doesn't quite have the physical strength, and I know that sounds a little mean, but it's true. He isn't quite the physically strong kind of bull rushing fighter that Lewis Crocker is. But he's definitely a good back foot operator and a good combination puncher, an impressive combination puncher, and also he's able to really sit down and put some volume. He's able to really sit down and actually put some power on the shots in those combinations if he wants to, and he's actually a very varied, colorful puncher with a lot of character, right? There's a lot of character to his combinations. There's a lot of variance and just interesting things going on, interesting rhythm going on in his combinations, and I understand why he was hard to read and why it was frustrating for Crocker. And it was one of those fights where you're always watching, you're like, okay, when is Paro going to run out of energy? He's got these hands for days. He's going to keep using these hands. When is he going to run out of energy? When is he going to slow down? And it just didn't really happen as much as you would want to, because the truth is he wasn't, flurrying. This wasn't, Sebastian Hernandez versus Jinzo Nakatani. He was selecting the times where he was going to throw. It was a very intelligent performance by Liam Paro to go with, how good the hands looked, right? And so ultimately Crocker just was sort of forced into fighting on the front foot. In a way where you're like, man, could he have been doing that the entire time? Could he have been pressing like this the entire time? And unfortunately, he didn't. I think Crocker himself was waiting for Paro to tire out, and it didn't happen to the extent that he actually wanted to. And so he was sort of forced to have these sort of championship round style, hunting a finish rounds in the last 2 rounds that weren't necessarily the way that he had to fight the fight. It wasn't necessarily how he had to go about it. He could have been a little more calculated in those late rounds, but he was down on the scorecards. So to a certain extent, he had to hunt a finish, and the reason he got down on the scorecards was because, well, he kept just anticipating that Paro would get tired, and it didn't happen. Paro kept throwing combinations. Paro kept winning the rounds, and Crocker had no way to get his combinations off other than to hunt Paro down and try to stand right in front of him. And he wasn't able to do that consistently until the last couple rounds. And even in the last round, to be honest, Paro did a really, really good job bringing it home there and clinching and, playing defense. I didn't give him that round, but he did a great job stopping Crocker from actually, doing anything really damaging or all that good looking or continuing any of the good work that Crocker had done. In the 11th round, that was a good fight. That was a fun championship fight. The undercard wasn't great. There were a couple fights on that undercard that featured somebody that honestly shouldn't have been in there in a ring that, had championship boxing going on in it. There was this rugby fighter who made his 4-round heavyweight debut in the co-main event, which is just like never a great thing to see. And, he lost to a pretty stock standard Australian heavyweight, and honestly kind of an embarrassing display, to be real, but it was his first fight. I don't really know anything about him as an athlete, but he didn't really look like he had any hands, to be honest with you. He didn't really look like he had any skill for the sport, or any natural inclination towards boxing technique beyond just his own toughness and inherent, large size and inherent athletic ability. But he didn't really seem to be a particularly gifted boxer other than necessarily having a good, fighting spirit. That's about all that was going on. But the main event, what was a great fight, a good moment for Australian boxing. Interesting that Crocker was willing to take a fight so far away from home. But I did stay up late to watch that fight. It was interesting. It was an interesting event, and I look forward to seeing how Liam Paro gets on as a champion. But, you do kind of worry sometimes with guys how much activity they're going to have once they get up to that championship level. I'd certainly like to see Liam Paro fight sooner rather than later. I'm sure Crocker will, because he's got back in the UK boxing scene, there's plenty of money, and he doesn't have a belt anymore. So obviously Crocker is going to fight, but it's part of the problem with this industry, right? Paro's got this belt now. He can sit on it and, just have the cloud of being a world champion and enjoy this victory over Lewis Crocker, who was, to be honest, one of the probably less known champions in boxing. Now that Paro has this belt, and you're one of those lesser known champions, think about a fighter like Badu Jack in the cruiserweight division, for example, and how he fights at such a low volume. Now, Paro, obviously a younger fighter, but again, like Michael Eifert, even with his mandatory challenger position against Bivol, you saw him only fight once a year. So it'd be nice to see Paro defend his title sooner rather than later, and for him to have some confidence in his own abilities, because that's really how I would see it. I think that there are fighters out there that Paro could certainly beat in a title defense, and I would like to see that in the future. So yeah, that concludes this video. Let me know what you guys think about Crocker versus Paro, and let me know who you guys are picking in Boots Ennis versus Xander Zayas from Barclays Center in Brooklyn tomorrow, June 27th. Peace out, like and subscribe, and I'll be back soon with more fight content for you guys. Peace.